Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conversation with Anand Patwardhan. My name is Nisha Thaplyal, and I am one of your co-moderators, along with Vikrant Kishore and Mudit Vyas, who I think most of you know and you will meet very shortly. We would like to begin with an acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the land, waterways, and airways of the Kulin, Wotjobaluk, Mara, and Kurnai nations on which we work, study, live, and gather for this event today. We would like to pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. We would like to pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Being part of this event is a great privilege and honor for me. Anand's films have challenged, inspired, and educated me since my student days at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Ever since then, his films have both pushed me out of my comfort zone and nourished me as an educator and a researcher. So this is a wonderful, precious opportunity today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Of course, this would not have been possible without a team effort, So we'd like to give a big thank you to Deepak, Dipanjali, Harun, Jyotsna, Priya, Ruchira, and all the people around us who do what they do so we can do what we do. Thank you, everyone. And last but not the least, some house rules for the next 1 hour. This is a 1 hour event. We will do our best to wrap things up within that time limit. This webinar is being recorded and it will be made public at a later date through the Humanism Project and SAFI social media accounts. It is not being live streamed. Please do feel free to ask questions at any point through the webinar. We ask only that you type your questions for our guest Anand Patwardhan only in the Q&A forum so we can be sure and not miss them. And the chat forum is for anything else that you might want to do during the next hour. The attendee mics and cameras are currently turned off, but when Vikrant indicates that it is time to ask your question, you will be able to turn on your microphone and your web camera should you choose to do so. Of course, if you would like your question to remain anonymous, you don't have to add your name, or you can just say so in the Q&A, and one of the moderators will ask the question instead for you. So welcome again. Thank you for your participation. And I will now hand over to Mudit and Jyotsna. Sorry, Jyotsna first from the Humanism Project, and then Mudit, who will introduce our organizations, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. Over to you, Jyotsna.
Thank you, Nisha. Hello and a warm welcome to you all on behalf of the Humanism Project. It is our privilege to host you, Mr. Anand Patwardhan, at this webinar today. My name is Jyotsna Sharma, and I'm going to introduce you very briefly to our organization. The Humanism Project is a national coalition of organizations and individuals in Australia and abroad who have come together to take a stand against violations of human rights and the growing environment of hate and division in India. Our group was formed in early 2020 after street protests erupted all over India, followed by the same in Sydney, Melbourne, and other parts of the world against the draconian new citizenship laws. We're a group of 100+ like-minded Indians who represent the broad diversity of the nation, not only in our ideals, but also literally. Our vision is to create a better world where all humans have equal rights, dignity, and opportunity, regardless of who they are, where they come from, how they pray, what they wear, who they love, or what they eat. Our ultimate goal is to contribute towards the building of a happy, prosperous, and united India. Our activities include political advocacy, which involves working with state and federal politicians with the aim to influence Australia's public policy in regards to India. Australian MP Mr. David Shoebridge only very recently moved a motion in the New South Wales Parliament on the important issue of India's Citizenship Amendment Act. We are pleased that the Humanism Project has played a part by providing a brief to Mr. Shoebridge. On-ground events and actions coordinated across continents in collaboration with ideologically aligned groups, production and dissemination of media and social media content that promote inclusiveness and diversity and counters hate messaging. We work with social media platforms like Facebook to enhance community standards and improve the detection of hate messaging. And lastly, coordinated human rights and legal interventions that include working with university academics, international human rights groups, as well as international legal organizations. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to us. Over to Mudit Vyas of SAFI now.
Thanks, Jyotsna. Hi, my name is Mudit, and the Humanism Project and SAFI, the organization that I am part of, have co-organized this event. SAFI is South Asians for Inclusiveness. We are an organization that, again, like the Humanism Project, was formed out of protests organized against the amendment to the Citizenship Act back in India. And our primary intention is to stand for a more progressive voice in the diaspora and to not let a certain kind of majoritarian sentiment take over diaspora's voice. We want to be able to speak with freedom. We want to be able to speak with reason. We want to be able to speak for all Indians and all South Asians, hence the name South Asians for Inclusiveness. I'll keep this short. I'm going to pass the mic now to Vikrant, who's also a member of SAFI, who will now introduce Mr. Patwardhan.
Many thanks, Mudit. And many thanks to Nisha Thaplial for wonderfully and painstakingly working for this webinar behind the scenes. And thanks to many co-collaborators that we have, especially Mudit, Deepak, Deepa, Priya, Jyotsna, Neeraj, and Harun. And a warm welcome to you, Anand Patwardhan ji, on our first collaborative community webinar. It was a pleasure to watch your recent in-depth documentary, Vivek, Reason. I will start with a kind of a brief introduction of Anand for our audience, and as many of them joined us recently for the online screening of Vivek. Anand has been making political documentaries for over 4 decades, pursuing diverse and controversial issues that are at the crux of social and political life in India. Many of his films were at one time or another banned by state television channels in India and became the subject of litigation by Anand, who successfully challenged the censorship ruling in court. Anand has been an activist ever since he was a student, having participated in the anti-Vietnam War movement, being a volunteer in Cesar Chavez's United Farm Workers Union, working in Kishore Bharati, a rural development and education project in central India, and participating in the Bihar anti-corruption movement in 1974-75, and in the civil liberties and democratic rights movement during and after the 1975-77 emergency in India. Since then, he has been active in movements for housing rights of the urban poor, for communal harmony, and participated in movements against unjust, unsustainable development, militarism, and nuclear nationalism. Virtually of all Anand's films have incurred the wrath of right-wing fundamentalists, both in India and abroad. Given the current volatile social, political, and economic situation in India, Anand's work not only becomes all the more significant for all of us to watch and engage with, but also provides a great understanding of how and why we are in this situation, and throws many questions for us to ponder upon. So now I will not take much time, and I'll in fact pose the first question to Anand here. And I would want him to share a bit about his journey as a filmmaker and an activist, and what has changed over the last 4 decades for him as a filmmaker. Anand.
It's a long journey, so basically I fell into filmmaking quite accidentally, in the sense that when I was on a scholarship in America in 1970s, and Vietnam War was going on, there were anti-war protests, and I borrowed a film camera from the theater arts department in my university and filmed some of those anti-war protests. It never became a film, but it gave me a taste for shooting. But then there was, that didn't take off right away. I came back to India in 1972, joined a voluntary development project in Madhya Pradesh. Basically, we were doing farming, we were doing teaching, It was like an agricultural university come teaching science in those areas. And I didn't do anything with film except I made a film strip about tuberculosis because we had a clinic and we had to motivate people to continue treatment after they got out of the clinic. Then in 74, the Bihar movement started. I was sort of not happy with the pace of change in the development project that I was working in. So I went to Bihar to initially as an observer, but then there was one day when they were doing a big demonstration and they wanted to have a record of that demonstration because there had been police violence. So they asked me to take photographs. But I went to Delhi, borrowed Super 8 camera and a friend with these 2 cameras, and we came back and shot that day's demonstration. And then we blew up this footage to 16 millimeter by projecting it on the screen and filming it again. So very crude kind of filmmaking. And that became the film Waves of Revolution. Almost within a few months of the film being made, the emergency was declared. So everything went underground. The people whom I'd been working with were in jail, etc. And then we basically cut the film into pieces and smuggled it abroad with whoever was leaving. And I got a teaching assistantship at university in Canada, went to Canada, put the pieces back together and completed that film as a protest against the emergency. And then I came back to India when the emergency ended in 77 and made another film called Prisoners of Conscience about political prisoners who had been in jail before, during, and after the emergency. And so slowly I slipped into the role of making documentary films, although I never was trained for it. So it was all trial and error, learning by doing. I think I'll leave it for here now so that I don't take too much time with biography.
That's quite an interesting journey that you just gave us a kind of a cursory view about. So one of the things that we are, facing here as Indian diasporas in Australia, and many of them have been questioning about the kind of work that you do. So what has been the kind of response that you have got from people abroad, especially, from the non-resident Indians, and then also other cultures and ethnicities?
So that has changed over time to some extent, because in the early days, basically I went abroad to show my films partly as for my fundraising. Now, my films are not paid by anybody. If you look at the credits there's no sponsorship, there's no grants. So all of this has to be generated after the film is made by screening the work. So I did a lot of lecture tours and screening tours, traveling to universities. And in the early days, say for instance, when I went to America, the right wing wasn't as big as it is now, but they would come and heckle, or they would come into the screening and ask questions and try to trouble the screening, try to either disrupt it or put pamphlets outside. But as time went on, I've noticed that the right wing just doesn't show up to these screenings. For some reason, I know what the reason is, because actually a lot of people from the right wing who actually took the trouble of watching these films, some of them began to change. Some of them began to change in the sense that they asked themselves questions that they hadn't asked before. And I think what the right wing understood was that it's dangerous to allow people to even watch the film. So the only thing that they ended up then doing is to attack the films without letting people watch them. So it was like a fake news kind of attack on the films, because if they actually watch the films, it would be much harder to attack them, because of films, in my opinion, are at the very least, they're factual. In the sense, at least I do a lot of cross-checking before I put a film out so that I'm not making any serious factual errors.
All right. I think this has been a kind of a situation that we face about things that you are talking about, fake news, and this has taken ground everywhere. And today it's all about sensationalistic news and representing news in a different way, and diverting attention of people from the real issues. And that's what I find very problematic. And one of the things, in fact, in recently what we have seen in the Western countries is the kind of rise of these kind of right-wing fundamentalists, as well as the white supremacists. And then recently some interesting books have come even in the Western countries. Caste is one of the biggest example, and then the kind of work that Arundhati Roy has been doing across the things. So do you make any connections between white supremacy and Brahminical supremacy?
Yeah, absolutely. It is very similar in some ways. It's similar in the sense that both of these are both the white supremacists as well as the Brahminists. By the way, I make a distinction between Brahmins and Brahminism. It's not that I make that distinction. Dr. Ambedkar made that distinction, that he said that our enemy is Brahminism. It is not the individual Brahmins. So I make that clear. But the connections are many between the white supremacists and the Brahminists, because firstly, you don't actually have to be a birth Brahmin to be part of the extreme right-wing gang. Today, it's much more complex than that. And this is maybe one of the differences between white supremacists and Brahminism, is that white supremacist is written on your face. I mean, the race is written on your face. It's the color of your skin. You can see it. So you rarely find what we find in India, where that Brahminism or Brahminist ideology can be supported by even non-Brahmins. In fact, today, the largest support to the regime in power is from middle castes. I mean, some of the OBCs, they have concentrated. Modi himself comes from the OBC caste, and they have also concentrated on getting this large section of people on their side. They've also made inroads sometimes in the Dalit community, especially with the leadership, sometimes putting them into embarrassing positions so that they cannot take an oppositional stand. So it's not as clear-cut as white supremacists. You won't find black people in the Ku Klux Klan, for instance. But the reverse is not true as far as the Brahminical forces are concerned. That's why it's important to make this distinction that we're talking about Brahminism, the ideology that started thousands of years ago.
Yes, true. I agree with you on this, Anand, because when we use the term Brahminical supremacy, it is not about looking at or pointing fingers at a particular caste, but a particular ideology that pervades that so-called upper caste. Even if you are at the lowest configuration of upper caste, yet that mindset pervades, and many people face those kind of discrimination. And this kind of Brahminical supremacy can also be reflected in higher Dalit class or caste also, who represent or somewhere discriminate on the basis of the class that they have achieved. And I've experienced that quite a lot in my particular dealings with people across. So I'm very much in agreement with what you are pointing it out here.
Just as patriarchy, for instance, I mean, sometimes some women are part of patriarchy because they've been socialized that way. They support the ruling system. So these are not completely, these are not compartments that don't overflow all the time.
All right. So again, since we are talking about supremacy and caste issues and all, and I will come back to Vivek and Reason, the film that is in the major focus here, a little later, but I'll still continue because you made this particular iconic documentary, Jai Bhim Comrade, and talking about Dalit activism. So do you think Dalit activism, where is it positioned now, and what is happening with with Dalit activism? And you pick certain, some of your segments were focused on Dalit activism and how things are changing, or issues which were raised by Jignesh Mevani or with the Unnao Chalo experience. So what is your take on that and how you have used it in your films?
Actually, you can go further back than Jai Bhim Comrade in terms of looking at where caste appears in my films. Even in the film Waves of Revolution, which was made in 1974-75, there's a sequence where people break their caste threads, because that was part of one of the calls given during the Bihar movement, that we should not take dowry, we should not do casteism, and they asked the upper caste to tear off their janeos in protest. And then in if you look at Ram Ke Naam, which is in the name of God, about the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi conflict, you see, and in those days actually I was attacked by many people because I kept asking people throughout the making of that film. It was made in the early 1990s, and October 1990 was the Rath Yatra. This was before the Babri Masjid was demolished. That happened 2 years later. But the first attack on the Babri Mosque took place in October 1990. And I noticed that when I talked to people, if their views were against the demolition of the mosque, I then asked them what their caste was. And I found a correlation between those who were not upper caste, but had no problem with coexisting Hindus and Muslims together. For them, building the Ram temple wasn't that, they didn't care about it. As a Dalit woman at the end of the film says that we are not allowed entry in the temple. Why should we bother fighting for Ram's temple? So but I was in those days attacked saying, why do you keep asking people their caste? As if I'm the casteist, because I was trying to make transparent this connection between what people's views were and where they came from, and what their background was, caste background. But this was the situation in 1990. Since then, the right-wing forces have become much cleverer. They were actually in those days attacked because they were a largely upper caste bastion. But they have taken great pains to then bring into their fold people of, there was in 1990s also there was a Mandal Commission, and the OBCs other backward castes got reserved seats. Earlier, Dalits had been given reserved seats, and that's always been a point of contention. Even today, people, especially upper caste people, always complain about reservations, without realizing the fact that reservations have existed for thousands of years. I mean, Dalits were reserved to clean the shit, do the dirtiest work. That job was reserved for them. Upper caste didn't do that job. But anyway, the point I was making, that the Ram Ke Naam also touches on the caste issue, but doesn't go into it in great depth. And then after that, Jai Bhim Comrade, and in the middle I made also some music videos. I made a music video with the Dalit poet Daya Pawar and Sambhaji Bhagat. It's a 5-minute music video called "We Are Not Your Monkeys," which is actually taking off on Mahatma Phule's understanding of the Ramayana, where he sees Ram as the oppressor, the people who represented the Aryans, who then subjugated the indigenous people, and then the caste system was put on top of that. So that in that sense, there's a kind of developing caste consciousness that you see in the films as time went on, you see it in Jai Bhim Comrade, and you see it in Reason. But in War and Peace also, which is a film I made against the nuclear issue, but there was a speech by Dalit Panther Bhai Sangare, who says that why have they done nuclear tests on Buddha's birthday? That May 11, 1998, India did nuclear tests, and he said, why have they chosen Buddha, who believed in non-violence and ahimsa, who had nothing to do with war? Why is he your symbol of nuclear power? Why didn't you choose all the gods that you have, who have all these weapons to represent our nuclear so-called greatness?
Good. Yeah, thanks for that, Anand. In fact, some of the things that I keep hearing about reservation are sometimes really, really on the face, especially this is, I'm talking in terms of diaspora. The other day I was in a conference and there was a gentleman trying to say that he came to Australia because he was fed up of reservations in India. And I was like, what? Anyway, that's aside. But again, you also pointed out this valid aspect of Buddhism and non-violence. And related to that, we have got a participant asking that question. And this is from Niyati. And she says, as an OBC, I completely understand Anand's point, which is why I connected with the movement and reason where Radhika Vemula converts to Buddhism. Do you think there is a rationalistic way for OBCs like us to move out of Hindu fold?
Absolutely. And if there is a thread that runs through my films over the last 40 years, it is that I saw this threat of Hindu majoritarianism pretty early in my as I became a filmmaker. That became obvious. I mean, especially it became obvious in the 1980s. Uh, by till the 1980s, I was making films about human rights, about working class issues, prisoners of conscience, who were people from the left who had been put in jail, and then Bombay Our City about slum dwellers. Uh, but then in the 80s, as the fundamentalism began to grow, my films concentrate on there were three films that in a sense became a trilogy that was In Memory of Friends, which was using the ideas of Shahid Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh was a revolutionary who was hung by the British at the age of 23. But before, in his jail diaries, he wrote a booklet called Why I'm an Atheist. And so we were using the ideas of, there was a group in Punjab as the Khalistan movement was growing that was traveling through the villages of Punjab, taking the message of Bhagat Singh from village to village, where he was talking about unity between Hindus and Sikhs. And then soon after that, Ram Ke Naam, In the Name of God, about the Ram Temple. And then after that, Father, Son and Holy War, which is a film that looked at religious violence, but from the perspective of machismo and the male psyche and gender issues. So in a sense, all these films came between the 80s and 90s when communalism was rising.
Yeah. Yeah, another kind of thing. And whenever I watch your film, Father, Son, and Holy War, where you have really, really, focused on that kind of gender issues and how, those kind of differences are being played up, or how deeply embedded that patriarchal aspect or patriarchy is embedded in the Indian society. And till date, I think about 5-6 months, I went back again to see Father, Son, and Holy War, and to analyze if things have changed for me. And especially I try to play these documentaries for my students in my documentary class. And it's when I watched it as a student in 1996, 7, I think around that time, it really opened my eyes about the issues. And till date, the things haven't changed. So that's the next question which is coming now. It's about the gender dynamics. What should be people aware in terms of their caste privileges and gender dynamics here?
Yeah, I didn't come. Sorry, I got carried away, and I didn't complete the last question properly. And that was a question about Buddhism, about whether people converting to Buddhism would be is a good step. And I think it is, in the sense that when Dr. Ambedkar converted, he converted with it was the largest single conversion in history of the world, where so many people changed from Hinduism to Buddhism in a single day. And since that time, that process has slowed down. Of course, it's not like millions are still converting, but I think that conversion is an act of rebellion, because the reason he chose Buddhism was that it was the most rational religion he could find. And it was also because he could have said everyone should become an atheist, but he didn't choose to do that because he saw that India is a very religious country. And if you want a mass following, probably you need to use a religious idiom. And Buddhism was the one religion that he found that did not even talk about God. It was not even about what will happen after you die. It's about how to lead your life while you're on earth. And so it was the most rational religion that he was looking at. And he didn't take all the irrationalities in Buddhism either. He took the rational elements in it. He didn't, for instance, propagate the idea that the next Dalai Lama will be found somewhere, to look for the next rebirth somewhere. He didn't talk about reincarnation because that was not the rational part. And he saw Buddhism as a religion that was not exactly a religion, it was a philosophy.
All right. So coming back onto that question on gender dynamics and about the privileged class or castes, what should be their response, or why should be they aware of this gender dynamics? Sometimes as we were talking about patriarchy, and sometimes the gender dynamics gets totally subdued by the kind of caste privileges are, or the patriarchal burden is there.
Yeah, so gender dynamics, of course, exists in India, probably even to a stronger extent than in many other countries, because slowly things are changing. There was a women's movement that began in the West in the 60s. Some of that came to India, and you can see that, but that is still to some extent restricted to the upper classes who have read and are exposed to this. On the other hand, in the working class community, there is a form of equality, greater equality, because of the fact that women actually go to work. So when you actually go to work, when you're the breadwinner, it changes the dynamic to some extent. But nevertheless, horrific incidents of violence against women continue every day. I mean, just yesterday, we heard about a 3-year-old girl being raped and killed in UP. And UP has become, under Yogi Adityanath, I mean, not that it was a lot better earlier, but UP has become a kind of rape capital of the country, where rapes and murders are going on all the time. And the state seems helpless because the police is also complicit in a lot of this.
Yes, true.
And not registering the cases and so on.
Yes, true.
And when it comes to women and Dalit women, then it becomes a double. I mean, you read the Anand Teltumbre's book on Kerlanji, for instance. Kerlanji is talked about in Jai Bhim Comrade also. But yeah, so you see the kind of incredible repression and atrocities that are taking place on caste and gender lines.
Yes, this is really, really saddening. And in fact, just in the morning, I was going through a Facebook feed where someone shared this 13-year-old girl who was raped by 7 or 8 people in Bihar, and they had shared their photographs of that rape, and it was shared across various WhatsApp platforms. Nothing can be worse than that, things like that. And Lakhimpur Kheri, it has been in news for last month or so, where 3 Dalits were raped, including that 3-year-old child. And you just don't know what to say and how to react. But anyway, I'll move on to the next question. And this is coming from South Asian Times, Neeraj Nanda. And his question is, how has documentary cinema changed in the rise of capitalism and Hindu ethno-nationalism in India?
Well, I think capitalism we've had from the beginning, in the sense that there wasn't any time in India that, after independence, when capitalism didn't exist. But it was in the early days after independence, it was a mixed bag. It was a mixed economy. Nehruvian economics was partly state oriented and partly private enterprise. It was a mixture of the two things. But that slowly changed. That became dramatically different in the late 80s, with around not even late 80s, where the neoliberal ideas came to India, brought to us through the World Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and they started to dictate our policy in one way or the other. And that, if you look at it's curious, because if you look at the rise of religious fundamentalism and majoritarianism, it coincides with the dawn of so-called liberalism, economic liberalism, where the idea that the state should take responsibility, and we should run health care should be done by the state, the railways should be done by the state, the education should be done by the state. All of that was under attack, and privatization became the buzzword, where more and more the ideology was spread that the state is inefficient, that our economic woes are because we're not giving enough to private capital. We should actually shift the economy into private hands. And in my view, that created far more injustice than existed earlier. In the sense that, today, for instance, under the new regime that we are under, they're trying to attract business away from China into India, international business. They have weakened the labor laws completely, so that workers have no protection, and they have destroyed the environmental protections. They are completely raping the environment. And I think your group in Australia actually should add to the other things that you're fighting, talk about the environmental disaster created in Australia by our Adani company, that is Modi's pal, who is now destroying the reef, the great Australian reef, the coral heritage of Australia, the natural resources of Australia. So I think there is a strong movement in Australia against this Adani company that is growing.
Anand, I would like to add, in fact, some of our members in our group are quite actively, participating in these particular rallies and voicing their opinion. Ruchira is one of our active members. She has been doing some incredible work in this area. So we are really thankful for having this kind of diverse people joining us and raising voice for things which matters for all of us. And what I'm going to do next is that I'm going to open up the live Q&A session for the participants to join us and ask questions directly to you. So the first question is from Zia Ahmed here.
Hello, Anand. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Very well.
Okay. Thank you very much for enlightening us. I'm hearing some very knowledgeable aspects of what we are facing. It's great to hear from you and get to know you. And I hope that in the future we can get this relationship going. You very well explained the difference and the similarities between white supremacists as well as the Brahminic supremacy. Can you also elaborate on the Nazi ideology and the Zionist ideology as well? Because we see quite a number of similarities and also, in fact, some collaboration between these four groups. What do you think about that?
Yeah, again, this is, I'll take you because I've lived long enough to have seen, India for, at least 50, 60 years of my adult life. And in the early days, there were two countries that my passport would not allow me to go to. One was South Africa because of apartheid, and the other was Israel, also because of apartheid, because of the oppression of Israelis on the Palestinians. And Yasser Arafat was a great friend of the Indian government. We had many ties with the Palestinian movement. But over time, even before the BJP came to power, even under Congress rule, this began to change. And Israeli elements, first they came into India through the cultural route. Because I remember growing up reading Leon Uris's Exodus and Mila 18 and the Holocaust stories, which are important. The Holocaust was a horrific incident, and we have to fight against those tendencies and that fascism. But at the same time, when Israel became the oppressor, um, by that time, India had, when in the sense that India slowly became a very complicit in what was happening in Israel, because we had military ties with them. We had our police goes to them for training, the army goes to them for training, and things like that. So we're very much now in bed with the Israelis, and that's why I, for instance, have not sent my films to Israel, even though sometimes they get invited. But I'm part of the cultural boycott of Israel, just as we did a cultural boycott of South Africa when the apartheid regime was in power. We do a cultural boycott of Israel as well. But
Thank you
that's
so
not
much.
the story. That's not the story with the government.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Zia. And now I'll invite Mr. Neeraj Nanda from South Asian Times.
Hi Anand, how are you?
I'm good.
I also started my activism by participating in a rally against the Vietnam War in Delhi University. And I'm like, so I'm just 2-3 years younger to you, but have been going on like you. So my question is, what is the role of cinema now in India's toxic atmosphere? Because you are such a prominent filmmaker. I want to know. That's my first question.
Okay, so I may be prominent in the sense that people have heard my names, especially maybe outside India more than in India. But one of the biggest problems of filmmaking like mine is that we don't get a mass audience, in the sense that documentary films, by their very nature, are far more restricted in terms of the outreach that they have. Their natural place would be on television. And that's why throughout my filmmaking life, I've had to fight court cases with Doordarshan, our national broadcaster, saying that you've got to telecast these films. And we won many of those cases, and 5 of films actually got shown on Doordarshan. By the way, even Jai Bhim Comrade was finally acquired by Doordarshan for telecast. But since at that time the government changed, 2014, and so they, even though they bought the rights to the film, they never showed it. So they're sitting on it, and we are doing a court case now saying that they've wasted public money by buying the rights but not showing the film. So it's the main problem for us, films like mine, whether they're documentaries or fiction, that are critical of the government in power or the ruling ideology, the majoritarian ideology. They have a hard time reaching people on a mass scale. So I can not claim that my films have made a political difference in a big way. The individuals I come across often who said that they watched the films and it affected them. But on a large scale, unless these films have a real mass screenings, they can't change the mindset of people. Yeah.
My second question is related to this only. How do you see social media? Is it useful, or for, let us say, go to the masses, or is it not useful?
Social media is useful right now for the simple reason that we have no other media that we can go to. Social media, we just put our stuff on YouTube or we put it on Facebook or something like that, and we get some eyeballs. But it's not like getting a cinema release. It's not like getting on television and where people on a large scale can view them. And the other problem with social media is that when you watch a film on social media, on your computer, you're alone. You're watching a film, one person watching one screen. You're not you don't have what we do, what I have always done in my filmmaking life is to interact with the public, to actually do screenings, public screenings, and sit and discuss the film afterwards with the audience. Because a lot of things come out in that discussion which are not necessarily would not come out by just watching the film. But in social media, that back and forth is very limited. You cannot do it. We are doing it right now, but again, we are a handful of people.
Great, thanks. Now we have Mr. Siddharth Matrak with us. He has a question here.
Hi everyone, and good evening to all. My question is like, no, there is a lot of African American people in America's movie on like, no, in Hollywood. Why there is no such good movies in Bollywood? Like I know like, no, there is a one movie called Untouchable, Shudra Kanya and Shudras, but not in that far like, no, which is in Hollywood. My question is to Anand.
Yeah. So I can't answer you many questions about Bollywood because I'm not part of Bollywood, and we are still a fringe element on the outside. And on the outside, there are films that are being made. There are, and especially today, Dalit filmmakers are making films, especially documentaries, because now you can also the mode of production has become easier, more democratic in the sense that you can buy a small camera and make films on that. There is an organization called Dalit Camera that I've collaborated with, in the sense that even in Reason, you see some sequence that was shot by Dalit Camera. So, but these are still early inroads. And in the fiction category, there are also some. There's Nagraj Manjule, who has made a couple of brilliant films that did well even in the box office. So I don't know if you've seen his work. Sairat is one of them, and Fandry is another.
Thank you. Yeah, I have seen the Sherat and the Fenry movies, but it's a very few movies, not large scale on the commercial movie in Bollywood. So I know that they can't get if the director put the money or investor put the money, they can't get it big because it will be not successful. But still, I'm asking questions here.
Yeah, but apart from the Dalit issue, look how many Bollywood movies are made about the communal issue. Very few.
Yeah.
That deal with the biggest problem right now in India is the majoritarian onslaught on the Muslim community.
Yeah.
And where are those films? Where are the films in Bollywood, fiction films that talk about? There are one or two that address that issue, but there's very little. So it's as if we are living in this majoritarian state that creates its majoritarian cultural entertainment, and that's what you see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Anand, the next question is from Mr. Vivek Asri. He says, I have been following your work since Ram Ke Naam, and today we have the world exactly what you have been warning us about. So there were warnings all around us, and yet we are here. And so who do you think we are now fighting against? What is the one big force, I guess? And have we failed, and why?
I think you have to basically think about it this way, that the Brahminical system is responsible for caste atrocities, but it's the same Brahminical system that is responsible for the majoritarian ideology. It's that same Brahminical system, and so that is the system that we have to fight, and we have to unite everybody that can be united, which is why I titled my film Reason, meaning rationality. So we have to unite anybody who allows themselves to think. Anybody who, I'm not saying you have to be a leftist, you don't have to, it's not, I'm not even defining the ideology in any narrow way. But anybody who's willing to think for themselves and not be told by their Shaka Pramukh or their some pre-digested religious ideology or political ideology as to how to think. If you're willing to break through and think for yourself, I think then you're already part of the group that we can have a large alliance with. And that large alliance is needed to fight the fascism that is growing in our country. I don't like to use the word fascism very loosely, because it's not obviously the same exact kind of fascism as Hitler's fascism or Mussolini's fascism, but I think you asked me this question earlier also. There are direct connections with that. I mean, It's no accident that Guru Golwalkar in his book, We or the Nation, We or Our Nationhood Defined, talks in glowing terms about the Nazis and what the Nazis have done, their final solution with the minority issues. And they said, we can profit by that. So this is now they have edited out. You won't find this in the new edition that they bring out of this book. These things have been removed. But if you go to the early editions, you'll still find it there. So this was the ideology. They learned from Mussolini and they learned from Hitler.
Great. We have Ruchira next.
Thanks, Anand, for the story about your work, and also the interesting. I mean, it's not an interesting connection; it's understood between the corporatization of India's growth and the rise of Hindutva. When I watched Ram Ke Naam, it boggled my mind to get the detail that there were some 200 Sangh Parivar, Sangh outlets in the US in 1990. To me, it's, kind of it. I mean, I think a lot of us get that a lot of the money for the growth of Hindutva actually flows in from the diaspora.
Absolutely.
And would you consider actually doing a project documentary on the global, kind of growth of Hindutva, and how can we as diaspora help with that?
I think you answered your own question, because you live there and you can do the work that you're saying I should do, because I'm here stuck right now in lockdown mode, not going out very much. But people part of the diaspora outside are doing amazing work right now already, both in America and I'm sure in Australia also. And I think that is a very important job to actually, because the Hindutva ideology has grown tremendously in the diaspora. I mean, and it often starts in very innocent ways. It's not like when you talk to somebody, especially in the early stages, who has been brought into like a Hindu, they have innocuous names like Hindu Society or Hindu Students for, they may not even use the word Hindu sometimes. They're like, because now they have adopted nationalism. I'll come to that slowly, because how that transition took place. But many people in the diaspora who join these groups initially do not realize what the poison is. They think that these are nice. They have Diwali meetings, they have holy meetings. I mean, they celebrate our festivals and they do all this. So it sounds very innocent, a cultural organization. But that is the trick that they have used from 1948 onwards. Because in 1948, after they killed Mahatma Gandhi, after Hindutva killed Mahatma Gandhi, they went underground. They were banned. The RSS was banned. The Hindu Mahasabha was banned. They went underground. They were not allowed to do, they were unbanned 1 year later when they promised not to do political activity anymore. So then they called themselves a cultural body and they did cultural work. And this became a magic wand almost, because under cultural work, you can do enormous amount of things. And the problem is that our secular side didn't do that kind of cultural work. They didn't build up a secular cultural force. Nothing to match what the right wing did. So that their cultural bodies split, they have thousands of names. I mean, whether it's the ABVP, the student wing started at the time when the RSS was banned in 48, and so did so many other, later the Vishwa Hindu Parishad began, and so many other groups. It's like a hydra-headed monster, but they have the same roots. And again, I don't want to demonize the individual. Just as I said that there's, you have to make a distinction between Brahmins and Brahmanism, you also have to understand that the technique that they used to recruit people, especially in the early days, was to recruit very young people. So in the RSS shakhas, people joined from the age of 4 and 6 and 8, and they live, and then these people at that very impressionable age were trained and became lifelong supporters. Some of them changed, but even Narendra Modi has been in the Shaka from the age of 6 or 8. So it's, in a sense, you can't even blame someone who is brought up in that ideology for so many decades that they think like that. So it's going to take a lot of effort to de-brainwash, to do the reverse of brainwashing, to actually open the mind.
Thanks, Anand. Yeah, that's actually
So
pretty accurate.
what I say is that therefore we can't treat people from the other side as the enemy. They're not the enemy. They are people who have been given wrong information for a long period of time, half information, fake news. So it's our job to actually just counter those arguments and give them factual information.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I grew up in an RSS family, so I can pretty much testify that it takes a village to keep one in the RSS fold, but it also takes a village to get them out. Like if I hadn't met the Bahujan leaders, some of us are on the panel here right now, I probably wouldn't have been as progressive that I would like to believe that I am right now. So I'd like to ask a question from Harun. It has a Dravidian context to it. Since the Shoshit Pichda population in Tamil Nadu especially is it's probably the largest percentage of the population of any state in India, the OBC population. So do you think there is a role that Periyar's work has in there to play to maybe counter Hindutva and upper caste Brahmanism?
Absolutely. Periyar was another great rationalist, and Periyar, in fact, I think I told this story before, but even Bhagat Singh's booklet called "Why I'm an Atheist," that had disappeared. It was a prison writing of his, and it was nowhere to be found. But somebody had translated it into Tamil. Because of the Dravidian movement, that book survived, and then again it was rediscovered. Why I'm an Atheist. So yes, as I said, there's a long tradition of rationalism in our country that goes back to the Buddha or to Charvaka, and we need to revive all those traditions.
So another question is, the next question is from Marika. It is about, so I'll set the context for it, and let me know if we are running out of time, but if it's okay, we'd like to go like 10 minutes for 10 minutes more. Is that okay, Anand?
I'm okay, fine. Anyway, okay. It's good.
Sure. Yeah. So the next question from Marika is about the role of Muslim leaders in India. And do you think Brahmanism also plays a role in keeping upper caste Ashraf Muslim leaders from asserting Muslim representation, Muslim voice, Muslim identity in the Indian politics and stop the march of Hindutva?
I would recommend to everybody to read a book by Shamsul Islam called Muslims Against Partition. It's a story that I didn't even know about, but it's an amazing story. And when you research it, you know that the majority of Muslims in India before partition didn't want partition. That majority was the working class and the artisans. The British, who actually wanted partition because then they could control the region much better, because having competing nations, and they would deal with each one separately and retain their power. The British wanted this division between Hindus and Muslims, and they, in a sense, promoted the Muslim League to the extent that one of the leaders of the large gathering of Muslims who were against partition was Allah Bakhsh. He was the premier of Sindh province. And 1943, he was murdered by the Muslim League because this was a growing movement that said, why have the British not allowed? I mean, firstly, that this question of partition was not being put to all Muslims. It was being put to, you had to have property, you had to have education to even tell the British that, do you want partition or you don't want? Do you want the creation of Pakistan or not? so it goes that far back that the Muslim working class and the working castes were never asked the question. And to this day, that situation continues. The elite is the one that you hear from the most. Even after people convert, sometimes they convert to get out of the caste system, that caste continues even in those converted religions. Like you will find Dalit Christians who have tremendous problems. You have Dalit Muslims who have tremendous problems. So this is something even deeper than religion. I mean, because, and I personally think that's what I was trying to get at even earlier, is that the fight against the caste system and the fight against majoritarianism is the same fight. Once you wake up to one, you wake up to the other.
Anand, thank you. So there are so many scenes in Vivek that have stayed with me, but because I'm an academic, the ones that I almost dream of are your interactions with the ABVP representatives, shall I call them? And so my question is more generally, could you comment please on the role of educational institutions, in the forward march of Hindutva, and there were no women. Most of the ABVP they were all men. I think those were that was great footage. So could you talk about your experiences of those parts of the film?
Unfortunately, it's not true that the right wing has no women. Unfortunately, they have a women's wing, many women's wings that are extremely active. I mean, you see demonstrations of women with swords, even in Reason. You see Sanatan Sanstha women with their swords and orange get up. So it's not such a clear-cut division on gender lines. It used to be more clear-cut in the early days again. It was mainly a male bastion, but now their male bastion remains. They don't allow women in the RSS directly, but they have the Rashtriya Swayam Sevika Sangh, which is an organization created for recruiting women. And many times those women are in the forefront of those demonstrations that they have, because they're trying to show how Hindu women are so liberated compared to Muslim women who have to walk around in parda, and four of them have to get married to one man. All this mythology that is built around the hate campaigns. So it is. It's just an accident at that moment, because I'm making documentary films. I'm not scripting anything. Everything that you see in my films actually happened, and the camera happened to be there, and so we filmed them. So in the ABVP at Hyderabad University, they came to attack the people who were sitting for Rohit Vemula. After Rohit Vemula's murder, suicide, whatever you want to call it, it was an induced suicide. People were sitting on dharna on the campus, and the ABVP entered to protest against them. And then I happened to be present, so that's the sequence that you see there. But I was shocked when I wasn't shocked. I know they do this all the time. On their banner, they had Ambedkar, they had Mahatma Gandhi, they had Bhagat Singh. So I started questioning them about how can you adopt these icons when your ideology, you're the guys who killed him, who killed Gandhi. And so it was just, for me, an opportunity to talk to people and engage with them. And the same thing happened in the Delhi march, where after there had been a big protest for Rohit Vemula, they did a counter march of the ABVP. And again, I will point out that, in the days that I grew up in colleges, the main student movement was the left-wing movement. It was the main student movements all over the country, all over India, all over the West even. If you remember 1968 in Paris, or if you remember the anti-Vietnam War movement in America, and in India also, it was progressive movements of students. But as the BJP came to power, they have actually taken over these student bodies, and they're using those student bodies as a weapon to to attack other students. And you see that on a big scale today in many, and the attacks are usually happening in public run universities. That's another distinction that you should understand, that privatization, the government's attempt to do privatization, is also because the largest amount of protest is coming from the universities that have public funding, because there the working class has some chance of studying. There people of other castes have some chance of studying. Uh, People like Rohit Vemula, people who actually got into college and were were getting an education, and that is where the ABVP also is concentrating their attack in these public institutions, because they can see that these. So it's a two kinds of attack. One is the government is killing their funding. So the government is trying to reduce the funding to public universities and emphasize private universities, because there will be no protest. The upper caste is not interested in fighting. Again, they've got nothing to fight against really. They've got what they want. Um, but in the public universities, there is protest, and in the public universities, there is ABVP.
Okay, Anand, I think this is a question from a religious point of view, or religious traditions in India, basically. So we've seen how caste supremacy has been challenged by Shramanic traditions like Buddhism, and by Guru Nanak's teachings, and by Islam to an extent, because it provides an avenue for people to convert to. Do you think the Kartarpur Sahib corridor and the friendship between Sikh leaders and Imran Khan, and all of those don't find enough mainstream, like Sikh and Islamic friendship and ties, do you think they never find enough limelight in discourse in India? And is
I wouldn't hold up Imran Khan as some kind of ideal, fighter against for communal harmony and building these ties. I think they're doing it for their own reasons. I'm glad that they're doing it. I mean, those places of religious worship in both countries should be open, and we should have those corridors. We should have at Ajmer Sharif, Muslims should be allowed to come from Pakistan, just as Pakistan allows Sikhs to go to the Gurdwaras. And we should have actually, I've been part of Pakistan, India, people's movement for friendship across the border, people-to-people relations for many, for a long time. And you see some of that in the film War and Peace, where we visited Pakistan, and they came to India. And so, on a people-to-people, even though the governments were at war, or the governments were either in a hot war or a cold war, but there is a need for this friendship across borders to grow. And on an individual level, and even with small groups, this is still happening. But I mean, Imran Khan is not the best example of giving us he might have done it in this instance, but there's no guarantee he'll do it in future.
Just a difficult question to ask, maybe a little tricky one as well. It is from the Kashmiri Pandit community in Australia. The last question was about how Islam has been a progressive avenue to fight caste supremacy, but it has also been a repressive force for Pandits in the valley. And so there has been this divide, especially in the diaspora, on how we see the conversion of J&K from a state to a union territory. So
let me say firstly that, again, I will go back to Gandhi's views on Kashmir. Gandhi believed that Kashmiris must decide the fate of Kashmir, that it is not the job of anybody else to do that. And Kashmiris as a whole must have a voice. I think what our government did by abrogating the articles 370, which came to us with accession. When Kashmir acceded to India, those were part of the conditions, and so we have, in my view, illegally broken the terms of agreement by which Kashmir acceded to India. And so if we want to say that Kashmir is part of India, then you have to have full democracy in Kashmir, which we obviously don't have right now. We don't even have internet free, forget the people free. So this is the situation. At the same time, what happened to Kashmiri Pandits is an awful tragedy which has to be rectified. And I think that even the Kashmiri Muslims of today who are fighting for what they call Azadi would not be opposed to Kashmiri Pandits coming back, because I think that was something that was wrong, that making the native people of Kashmir run away because of terror was something completely wrong. So I think and I think that the Indian government actually played a role in in creating the siege mentality amongst Kashmiri Pandits, that you have no option but you have to get out. But at the same time, we have to. Frankly, I believe in non-violence. I think that the solution to Kashmir also has to come from non-violent struggles. And that non-violent struggle will have to be an inclusive one, which includes Kashmiri Pandits, which includes Kashmiri Muslims. And you do see the voice of Kashmiri Pandits who are opposed to the atrocities going on in Kashmir today. Their voice can be heard. I think you may know of Sabrang India, which is an organization run by Tista Setalwad. And they have worked with Kashmiri Pandits who have spoken out against the atrocities in Kashmir. So I think that this, we should oppose the attacks on minorities in every part of the world, whether it's in Kashmir, whether it's in India, anywhere, Pakistan, Bangladesh, anywhere. Minorities have to be protected.
All right, thanks, Anand. Now we have to wrap up the session soon. So before leaving the session, I would like your views or any particular advice or message that you would like to give to the diasporic Indians, especially in Australia. What do we do? What do we keep in mind?
No, I think nothing new to add, except that basically once you are out of your native country, you have a chance for your mind to expand in ways that may not have happened had you stayed in your own little place. Because there you had all these influences of majoritarianism or whatever identity that you had. But once you're out of the country, there's every reason why a much broader identity can emerge, which is what you're doing, which is a human rights identity of people, of South Asians. And so I think you're already on the right path. And all you need to do is to expand without prejudice, in the sense that don't write off people who don't have ideas like yours. In fact, that is the fertile soil in which you need to sow your seeds.
Great, thanks, Anandji. And before we end, I'll invite Neeraj Khan to extend vote of thanks on behalf of SAFI and the Humanism Project. Neeraj.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anand Patwardhan. Thank you for giving us your time. It has been a pleasure and a very informative and enlightening Sunday to say the least. We're all truly grateful for your incredible, tangible efforts towards making this world a better place for everyone. We are all progressive people from Indian diaspora working together to stop hate and divisiveness, to reclaim our national values of tolerance and inclusiveness. We stand for transnational brotherhood and sisterhood. Our doors are open very wide for collaborations, as well as for anyone who'd like to join our cause. Links have already been posted in the chat. Please feel free to send us a message and on any of our social media handles, and we'd love to get more collaborations and like-minded individuals to come on board. On behalf of SAFI and The Humanism Project. Thank you for your time today. I hope you all have enjoyed the session, and we aim to bring some of same to you in your future. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Miraj.
Thank you.
Closing such an intense, insightful, and thought-provoking session like this is always difficult. I have been watching Anand's film as a student, starting with Ram Ke Naam and The Father, Son, and Holy War, which left a deep impression and probably helping me question things around me, my own prejudices, discriminatory social structure, high-handed governance, and the challenges posed to secular and democratic values. Anand in his films questions sexism, caste practices, Brahminical hegemony, religion, right-wing nationalism, sensationalistic yellow journalism, and of course, violence that is perpetrated day to day. So Patwardhan's voice through his films is of courage, hope, and takes on bigotry and oppression heads on, often putting him in danger, both from the fundamentalists and the government. It is not an easy task to tell stories such as these. For us, the diasporic Indians that are witnessing many of these issues surfacing around us, Anand's work should make us think that how important it is for each one of us to raise our voice against any kind of oppression, sexism, communalism, casteism, racism, bigotry. This is a continuous struggle. And with more of the same voices joining in this space, will help the voiceless and the marginalized immensely. I would like to thank Anand again for joining us today and talking about so many of the issues that are relevant and concerns us all. Any last thing from the team here, Mudit, Nisha, please feel free to add. Otherwise, my special thanks to all who have joined us today for this session. We will be putting this particular video online soon. And please keep us connected with us on SAFI's platform or the Humanism Project's platform. Keep well and stay safe in these times of COVID-19. Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim, everyone.
Jai Bhim. Jai Jagat.